the Supreme Court, so we're still waiting. You've got some research out. I mean, to be real, there could be one extreme. They could fully repeal it, right? Or they could fully back the president's IEEPA tariffs. How likely, though, in your view, before we get into the nuances, how likely is it to be one of those extremes, Matt?
I think it's less likely than the middle gray area where there could be room for nuance. These are complicated matters, and there are lots of different opinions that are likely being held by different members of the Supreme Court. So we do think that the sort of black and white scenarios are less likely than that middle ground gray area, where we do think that there's room for differences of opinion to come through in the final opinion whenever it gets released.
When the president was in Detroit at the Economic Club yesterday, he said, we should win on tariff Supreme Court case. He said that. And he said, we'll figure something out if we don't win the tariff case. Is he right to think that he will win it?
Well, I think the president is right to think whatever he would like to think. In the end, it depends on the group of individuals who are tasked with setting the law of the land. So I don't know if he's right or if he's not right. The Supreme Court will tell us one way or the other.
So when we do hear from the Supreme Court, let's say it doesn't go directly in the president's favor. He said, we'll figure something out if we don't win the tariff case. What's a likely scenario for his team to figure out how it can legally implement or keep these tariffs should the IEEPA tariffs be ruled unconstitutional?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think the first thing to note is that there are already bilateral agreements that are sort of working their way through the system. Some of them have been finalized in as far as we think they might be finalized. Others are probably still in a period of back and forth. But the president does have the ability to do bilateral deals with countries, number one. Number two, he has other authorities that are at his disposal to take some of the emergency tariffs that he put in place and kind of repackage them under these different authorities. So, for example, Section 232, Section 301, right? These are numbers that many people may not be familiar with, but starting in 2016,
they are now.
Very quickly became aware of these different authorities that the president has to implement tariffs. So I think he's got some of those authorities. There's a Section 122, which allows the president to put up to a 15% tariff on countries for a limited period of time. So there are definitely things that he could do.
We didn't hear anything about Congress and using the powers of Congress to do this.
That's what I think is interesting. And we want to get into what you see as there are more nuances in terms of how this plays out. But you do wonder about the precedent that's set by this ultimate Supreme Court ruling about what this means going forward and the role that Congress has historically and is supposed to be playing when it comes to levying tariffs.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the possibilities that the Supreme Court could lay out is they could lay out some kind of a time frame for the administration to get the approval of Congress in order to keep the emergency tariffs in place. So this is what we mean by nuance, is that there's lots of different ways this could play out. And one of the ways is that the Supreme Court could encourage the administration to gain the approval of the Congress in order to keep the tariffs in place for an extended period of time.
Go back to checks and balances, perhaps, right? Like that would be the message. You did share with our producer, Talia, a note about these in-between scenarios, and I just want to pull out some of it. It said, these are your words, should the Supreme Court overturn the IEEPA tariffs, we think the two main considerations for investors with respect to the US Treasury's financing needs are the magnitude and timing of when refunds would begin. We think the impact to Treasury issuance will be limited to bills. Limited refund scenario, likely no meaningful changes to bill issuance. Partial refund scenario, the Treasury likely makes a small increase to regular bill auction sizes. Fast scenario, the Treasury likely issues a few ad hoc cash management bills. So in other words, they're going to have to come up with some money.
So very possibly, yes, they may have to come up with some money. I think earlier this week there was a Truth Social post by the president relating to the issue of refunds, and the president made it, I think, clear that it's not going to be so easy to figure out who exactly is owed refunds and on what time frame they're going to be paid those refunds. And so I think from our perspective, even if the Supreme Court makes it clear that refunds will need to be paid at some point, the administration may have a lot of leeway to pay the refunds on their particular timeline. And so for the US Treasury, who will ultimately have to push the button and send the funds, exactly when they need to raise the funds in order to send them through the wires is going to be very unclear. And when they do decide they need to get the money, they may pre-fund the Treasury General account by issuing some Treasury bills. I think that's very, very normal, and the bill market can certainly handle that.
Could it be inflationary?
Could the refunds be inflationary? Well, from the perspective of our economics team, the refunds that we might be talking about.
We're putting a lot of carts before a lot of horses here,
That's exactly right. But even if we take the extreme scenario of the refunds getting paid on a reasonable time frame, our economists don't expect it will subtract that much from inflation because of the tariff rates will be coming down. And they also don't expect that it would add that much to real GDP.
Because I'm just thinking stimulus checks. When I hear a refund check come in the form of tariffs, I'm thinking what happened with stimulus checks during the COVID pandemic.
Well, we have to also bear in mind that these refunds are very likely mostly will be paid to companies. And not necessarily to households.
And maybe just helps out those companies who've been dealing with higher costs. Hey, one last question. Are there any in-between scenarios when it comes to an independent Fed under President Trump, in your view?
Well, I think there's lots of considerations here, Carol. And when we think about the independence of the Fed, the first thing we need to understand is that we're talking about a committee of individuals. And so in order to gain overriding control on this committee, you'll need more than just the chair of the Federal Reserve. Number two, whoever ends up being the next chair of the Federal Reserve, when they make a decision on policy, they're going to have to explain it to the investing public and to the public at large in a way that's credible. And if that explanation does not strike people as credible, then financial markets will extract a price.
So the market is kind of the checks and balances.
Absolutely.
On any Fed. I'm reading 1929 by Aaron or Sorkin. And it's Andrew, sorry. And it's just interesting, like you think about the pressure on the Fed back then during the panic, and you're just thinking about the pressure here. It's different, but you just whether, what this would mean for the financial markets going forward.
That's right. I think kind of related to this, what is really important is that whoever is in charge of the Fed and whatever the committee ends up looking like, that they get the best quality data from our statistical agencies, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, that they possibly can get. And one of the things that has happened since the government shutdown in October is that the quality of the data has deteriorated. The response rates to the labor market report have plummeted. It's really important that whoever is in the Fed, at the Fed, they get the best quality data that they can get to make the best decisions for the American people they can.